What makes wine taste good? What makes a wine region better or higher quality than another? I think to best understand this, we should play a game. Let's pretend that we're opening up a winery together. Slik Wines. I like it. So let's think about if we could set up a winery anywhere in the world, what kind of factors would we consider? How do we pick the perfect place to set up shop? I want to talk about these 4 unchangeable natural factors that make a wine region just better than other wine regions. The 4 biggest unchangeable factors that affect the taste or quality of a wine is location, climate, aspect, and soil. For the wine nerds who are telling me that vinification and winemaking decisions also affect this,
I know.
but we have to start with the things that are unchangeable first, and we'll do a video about that later, I promise. Location, location, location. Like all crops, all agricultural crops, which is what wine is, they thrive in certain places. You think of pineapples thriving in tropical climates and rutabagas thriving in colder climates. Wine grapes are also no exception to this, and we have to really think of being a farmer, because that is what we are. We are farmers trying to figure out the best place to grow the best grapes to make the best quality wine. We are just essentially growing a luxury crop, so let's just keep that in mind. And it's important to note the difference between winemaking grapes and table grapes, and we talk about that in our What is Wine video as well, so give that a watch if you haven't. These European grapes, the name is Vitis vinifera, and I'm not gonna have people in the comments telling me that it's Leviosa, or vinifera, okay? It's just that is the scientific name for it. I'm not gonna break it down any further. If I say it wrong, sue me. Fight me. I'm gonna put you in a chokehold. So the most common region for these European wine grapes are between these temperature zones on a map. Imagine a map. It falls between 30 degrees and 50 degrees latitude, both in the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere. So there's this nice band in which wine lives. And this was the school of thought for a while, that these were very rigid, that they always just was best in these areas. But the times, they are a-changin', and we've learned a lot. We have a better idea for these locations now, and knowing that it's not just latitude, but also considering things like currents and wind patterns. Ocean currents carry warm and cold air, which can affect where these sort of latitudes lie. So the map kind of used to look like this, but now it's a little more like wavy gravy. So if you look at the map, you can see how it's the sort of cool currents of this Peru or Humboldt current really brings in this colder air, making it a more sustainable climate for grapes all along that coast in South America. Or another example, in the northern hemisphere, you think of England as being kind of a cold place, but these warmer currents are bringing this cold air a little more north, so actually also a very good place for wine. Considering these currents is good, but we also have to understand that the world is getting warmer. I don't want to have a political talk about climate change, but this is just the trend that has been going on, and you talk to any farmer and they agree the world is just getting warmer. These latitudes shifting up will change the flavor of wines currently being grown in these regions, but also introduce kind of these newer wine regions. Places like Canada and even Sweden are now starting to grow grapes. I've got some good money on Scandinavia, honestly. They got some good skin in the game, I feel like. Considering those factors, some of the best wines are grown on west coasts of any continent. They tend to be colder and less humid than the east coast counterparts. Also, being relatively close to like a mountain range or a forest helps protect the grapes from humidity, from winds, and just severe inclement weather. Thinking about that and looking at a map, you can sort of piece together of where these good wine regions might be. So that's just one thing to think about. Next thing, climate. Brief semantics here. Climate is the average weather of a region. Climate is predictable, whereas weather is unpredictable and can only really be forecasted within the first week or two. Think about it. You check the 10-day weather forecast. You don't check the 10-day climate forecast. So what makes a good climate? A good climate is a nice balance of heat, sunshine, rain, and frost.
Like, bro, frost? What are you talking about?
Like, just let me get there. Frost is very important. So a good crop of grapes require heat and temperatures to grow. It requires the sunlight to start photosynthesis. And of course, plants require water or rain, and this is very much a Goldilocks situation too. Like too much rain and then they get waterlogged and then the grapes really just taste like water. Too little rain and of course they die, so they're very picky. Grapevines are interesting because yes, there's a harvest season for when the grapes are actually grown and they produce fruit, but the actual vines live year-round, even though they don't look alive because they're not making anything. So when winter rolls around, a good amount of frost is actually good. It helps build up resistance, build a thicker bark, and kills pests. But again, this whole Goldilocks thing, right? It can't be too cold, otherwise they die, but it does need to be a little cold, nicely cold, to achieve some of those effects. Third, aspect. What the f is that? We love a winery with a sweet, sweet aspect. The aspect is the direction in which the grape faces, the angle, and then if there's any sort of slope to it, the height of the slope. And you're gonna wanna think about why that matters. It's important because the aspect will tell you how effective the climate is to the grapes. And let me give you an example. The best example is the Mosel River in Germany. It's a very steep aspect that runs into this river valley. So, depending on which way the grapes are facing, you're gonna have a nice surface where the sunlight hits every single grape, right? So if I am grapes, I am south facing, which is the best case scenario for a place like Germany, I get the maximum amount of sunlight. I am getting the most sunlight here, and that's important. For a colder climate like Germany, the grapes want to be sort of as warm as possible. So this is why some of the best grapes in Germany are made along the Mosel. As opposed to me facing this way, you can see that like, yeah, I'm getting sunlight, but I'm seeing mostly shade. And that might be beneficial for hotter climates, but in places like Germany, you're gonna wanna get as much sunlight as you can. Another example is a place called the Douro Valley in Portugal. As opposed to the Mosel, which is like very straightforward, easy to see, the Douro Valley is just a mess of hills and mountains, and it's going every which way. And you really need someone who understands not only the climate, but also all these aspect features of like, okay, I'm in Portugal, which is this kind of climate. Which way do the grapes need to face where I get the best results? The aspect was the hardest one for me to conceptualize when I started, so don't worry if this feels like it doesn't matter much, but you know, if we're gonna open a winery, it definitely does. And we'll just like hire a consultant for that or something. We'll figure it out. But you can sort of start to see where it gets a little complicated and where there's nuances and why it might be important. Finally, we're going to consider what kind of soil is in this region. And it's not just a bunch of rocks, they do matter. Soil allows for proper drainage for the region, as well as access to minerals depending on what kind of soil it is. For a very long time, people always felt that the vines had to struggle to make good wine. And it's a very good PR and marketing story, right? It's like wines are like people, right? And it's like, that's cute, but it's not ultimately the case. And just like any plant, they need a certain amount of nutrients to survive and make great fruit. And even though the thought process was like, well, the struggle is good because they have to create root systems that go deeper into the earth to get more minerals, to get more water, and that makes them hardier and better and make the wine taste better. And although those deeper root systems can prevent drought in some cases, it doesn't actually always make the wine taste better. Drainage is also important. You think about having a houseplant. If anyone's ever overwatered a houseplant, you'll know that you can easily kill them if you don't have good drainage, whether it is a layer of rocks on the bottom that helps drain out the water or some sort of dish, anything like that. So grapes are very much the same way. They need a certain amount of drainage to survive. Certain soils do better at that than others. So soil, there's hundreds, thousands of different kinds of soils out there. So you kind of want to think about what would be best suited. And of course you can't be picking the soil. You kind of just need to see what exists in that region and what kind of grapes you're trying to grow, what kind of aspect you're working at. You have to consider all the other factors in deciding what the soil is saying, doing, that helps you plant the best product. So for example, in Chablis in France, there is a famous soil called Kimmeridien limestone. And the story goes that there's a prehistoric ocean bed in Chablis. And so for this Kimmeridien limestone, there are bits of oyster shells and mussels and crabs and things like that that really affect the flavor of a wine. A lot of this has been proven to be true, and some people even swear that there's a bit of this saltiness that you imagine from this prehistoric ocean bed. So this is also where the sort of story and the majesty of wine gets really interesting. Another example is basalt or volcanic soils. So you think about any place in the world currently that has a volcano, think of Sicily, Mount Etna, or where it used to have a volcano, think of the Willamette Valley. These soils bring on very distinct flavor that comes aside from just the grape that is planted there, but also the soils that exist there as well. So great, we've considered all these factors, we're looking at the map. What are the best places to do Slik wines, right? And you look at the map and you go, a lot of these places are really famous that fit into these aspects of being in this correct latitude, being on the West Coast, and having these certain soil types. But you know what? I really like Barolo, and it kind of checks off all these boxes, so I'm gonna say, hey, let's just look in Barolo. Let's start there. All right, real estate in Barolo.
Bruh.
Nope. Well, okay, let's try Michigan instead. I'll see you there, Slik Squad.